The Legacy Superhero, Season 1, Episode 9, The Price of Heroism. Bullets struck me in the chest, shoulder, and stomach. The impact of the bullets sent me staggering backwards, my arms swinging, until my foot met empty air behind me and I fell straight down to the street below, screaming my lungs out. This was the end. As I fell, my life flashed before my eyes, almost like a movie in my head. From my earliest memory of eating birthday cake for my 5th birthday, to the day I got the Trickshot Watch in the mail, it all flashed instantly. It disturbed me how short my life had been, but I guess 16 years really isn't much. Not that I had time to think about my life, however. The street below was coming to meet my back, and I could only hope that I would die upon impact, because I was already in more pain than I had ever been in my life. I could only stare up at the lights from the Peter Glow building and the barely visible stars twinkling in the night sky above as I rushed toward my doom. I wasn't much of a praying person, but I did pray to God that my parents and grandfather would be safe. It wasn't much of a prayer, given how I was screaming my head off and unable to think clearly, but it was a prayer nonetheless. That was when I felt something stir inside me, something that I had never felt before. It felt like power bubbling forth from within me, power I had never even known I had. It filled my bones and body like water, flooding my entire being and making me even more aware than I already was. And right before I splattered against the pavement below, I stopped. That's right. I just stopped in midair, hovering inches above the cracked pavement below, like I was being suspended from a rope. And it occurred to me where I had felt this before. It was how I felt when I was flying in the Trickshot suit. But how was I flying now? I didn't have the Trickshot watch, nor was I wearing the Trickshot costume. There was no way I should have even been able to float, yet here I was, hovering above the pavement below like I was lying on my back in a pool. I had no idea how that worked, but I decided not to question it. I immediately flew back up, straight toward the top of the Peter Glow building. It didn't take me long to reach the roof again, and by the time I did, I was more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life. I landed on the roof and fell on my hands and knees, panting and gasping for air, my lungs burning. Looking up, I saw that Michael, Christina, and the Injectors had already gone back inside the building. Once again, I was alone on the roof of the Peter Glow building, but this time, I knew why. I struggled to get back to my feet, but the pain from where I'd been shot was too much. I fell back down on my hands and knees, struggling to remain conscious, but even doing that much took almost all of my conscious effort. My head throbbed and my mouth felt dry. Blood leaked out of the bullet holes in my body and darkness was gathering around the edges of my eyes. Great, just great. I'd somehow managed to retain the ability to fly, but it wasn't enough. Instead of dying as a splattered mess of bones and blood on the street, I'd just bleed out to death. Maybe my death would end up on one of those YouTube videos that likes to speculate about bizarre deaths no one can explain, which would actually be an awful way to be remembered. But a flash of light before me caused me to look up, and I was surprised by who I saw floating before me, looking down at me with concerned eyes. It was TW. He was fuzzier and more transparent than usual, to the point where I could barely see his face. Nonetheless, there was no mistaking the hologram floating before me for anyone other than my faithful sidekick and mentor, the guy who had been with me ever since I got the Trickshot watch and taught me almost everything I know about it. TW, I said, my voice shockingly weak even to me. What are you doing here? I don't have the watch anymore. You shouldn't be here. TW smiled grimly. Actually, I can project my hologram well beyond the parameters of the person who happens to own the Trickshot watch. There is, however, a limit to how far I can project, and I'm pushing that limit farther than I ever have before. That's why I look fuzzier than normal. It's almost all of my strength just to appear before you like this. Wow, I said. I coughed and gasped suddenly. Not that it matters. I'll probably die of blood loss soon. You'll just be the only witness to my death. Not exactly, said TW, shaking his head. Here, let me help you. TW leaned forward and brushed his fingers against my forehead. It was a surprisingly cool touch, more like a gentle summer breeze than an ice cube. As soon as his fingers brushed against my forehead, the pain in my body started to go away. The bullets in my body fell out of the bullet holes, while the holes themselves started to close up naturally on their own. Soon the bullet holes closed completely and I no longer felt like I was dying, though I was still very tired nonetheless. I felt the spot on my chest where the bullet had struck. No way. This can't be happening. I must be hallucinating this entire thing. You are not hallucinating, said TW, standing up straight again. All of your injuries have indeed been healed. You're as good as new now. But I was at a complete loss for words. How? I don't have the Trickshot costume. How could I have possibly been healed without my powers? I forgot to mention to you that the powers of the Trickshot costume linger for 5 minutes after the suit is taken off, said TW. Granted, they linger in a much weaker form than normal, but they're still there and they can still work, including the suit's healing abilities, which I activated by touching you. Therefore, the remnants of your power must have saved you from your demise. So, that's why I managed to fly despite having lost the watch, I said in a voice of gradually dawning realization. That's amazing. It's not amazing, TW insisted. It's just the natural abilities of the suit. You see, when you wear the suit regularly, it does, at least to some degree, start to become a second skin. It forms a symbiotic relationship with the host, and the quicker it does, the more likely you are to retain your powers even after taking off the costume. It's still amazing regardless. I slowly rose to my feet. Thanks, TW, I really owe you one. No problem, Jack, said TW. I'm merely doing what Gregory would want me to do. Besides, I like you a lot better than I like my current owner, Anne. TWC fizzled out of existence before reappearing, though now with a more worried look on his face. Oh, said TW, a weird echo to his voice now. I'm almost entirely out of my range now. I don't have much longer before I can no longer project myself to you. Where is Michael Jones? I said. Can you tell me where he's going? Back to his office, said TW, his voice rising and falling in volume with his flickering body. Your parents are there, too, and Christina. You should hurry because... TW abruptly vanished just then, leaving me alone on the rooftop of the Peter Glow building once again. I wish that TW had stayed a little while longer because I wanted to know why I needed to hurry. What was Michael doing that made my urgency important? Not that it mattered. Michael may have thought that the war between me and him was over, but as he was about to learn, it just got started. I ran over to the door to the rest of the building and, opening it, peeked my head inside. I saw nothing except a set of stairs leading down further into the building, but I knew better than to just rush blindly into the unknown. They couldn't be that far ahead of me, given how I hadn't been falling very long. Still, without my costume, I'd have to be careful about moving forward, lest I attract their attention and get into a fight I couldn't win. I began walking down the stairs slowly and cautiously. I wanted to walk quickly, but I was afraid of my footsteps being heard. So I moved as silently as I could, taking each step one at a time and pausing to listen for any sounds below. It was oddly quiet, but it made sense, given how they didn't expect anyone to come down from the roof. As far as they knew, I was a splattered mess on the street where I couldn't hurt anyone. I couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when they found out that I was still alive. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I found another door, this one with a tiny window that allowed me to look out into the hallway on the other side. Peering through the window, I saw that the hallway beyond was empty. I didn't see either my parents or the Injectors, but I knew they had to be somewhere nearby. Just as I was about to open the door, however, one of the doors in the hallway outside opened. I immediately moved my head away from the window and went very still, listening to the sounds of footsteps on the carpet. Very carefully, I peered through the window again and saw 2 Injectors who I recognized as being a couple of the jerks who shot me walking toward this door. Uh-oh. If they entered the staircase and saw me, I'd be dead for sure. I looked around for a place to hide, but in this small space, there was no real hiding place. I just moved over to the other side of the room and crouched as low as I could. When the door opened, it would block me from their view, which would mean they wouldn't see me immediately. And if they walked up the staircase, then I would also have to bet on them not looking down and seeing me either. It was a terrible situation to be in, but it seemed like I found myself in terrible situations a lot nowadays. The door opened. It nearly slammed into me, stopping just inches from the tips of my shoes, and then the 2 Injectors entered the stairwell. Luckily, they didn't look around when they entered. They just started walking up the stairs, talking to each other all the while I stayed as still as I possibly could against the wall, hoping against hope that the Injectors would not look down and see me crouching there like a kid playing hide and seek. This seems like a waste of time, said one of the Injectors in a low, gruff voice. No way that kid could have survived being shot 3 times and falling from a 6-story building. I agree, but the boss wants us to make sure, said the second Injector, whose voice was a lot louder than his friend. Says that he doesn't want any unnecessary surprises. You know how he is. I hid my surprise, but I found it difficult because I thought I had the element of surprise on my side. Perhaps I still did, because Michael Jones did not know if I was still alive or not. Regardless, I would have to move quickly now, because once the Injectors got to the roof and looked over the side of the roof and didn't see my body below, they'd probably rush back down to let Jones know about my survival. As soon as the door to the roof opened and closed, I rose to my feet and left the stairwell, walking down the hallway as quickly as I could. There were a lot of doors on either side of the hallway, but not one of them was conveniently labeled with the Injector's name, which made it hard to know where Jones could be. Even worse, I didn't have all the time in the world to open each door and find out who was behind each one. "Jack," said TW's voice in my head suddenly, though very weak and faint. "Jack." I stopped and looked around suddenly. "TW, is that you? Where are you?" Third door from the stairwell on the left side of the hall came TW's voice again. "It's unlocked, but hurry, please hurry." TW's voice trailed off, which made it more urgent than ever that I find Jones' office. I backtracked a few doors until I found the door TW had described to me. It was an ordinary brown office door, indistinguishable from the 5 others in the hall, and completely unmarked save for the words Joe's Car Washing, Inc. Main Office. I frowned. The Injectors were doing business under the name Joe's Car Washing, Inc. I guess it made sense, because no one would expect the office of a car washing company to be the front for a dangerous drug cartel, but at the same time it also felt a bit silly. Couldn't they have used a cooler business name than that, like maybe IN Technologies or whatever? But it didn't matter. I cracked the door open just enough to peer inside without being seen. I was surprised by what I saw. It was a large, open office space with plenty of room for 5 or 6 people at least. At the far end of the room, tall windows overlooked the entire city of Rumsfeld, which glowed brilliantly in the dark night. On the right side of the room was a bookcase filled with books and folders, though they did not appear to be arranged in any particular order. On the left side of the room, however, was Mom and Dad, who were still tied up and unconscious. My heart ached when I saw them, but I didn't burst in right away, because Mom and Dad were not the only people in the room. Michael Jones and Christina Madison stood near the back of the room. Well, Michael stood, holding the Trickshot watch in his hands and looking at it curiously, while Christina sat down in a chair in front of his desk with her legs crossed and her hands folded on her lap. Neither one of them seemed to be paying attention to their surroundings, so I opened the door, sneaked inside, and quietly closed it behind me before I hid behind a second desk that was currently unoccupied. Crouching underneath the desk, I peered through the small hole that was meant for wires in the back of the desk, watching Michael and Christina and listening to their conversation. "The watch is a lot less impressive than I thought it was going to be," said Michael, tossing the watch from hand to hand like a ball. "It doesn't look any different from the watches that ordinary people wear." "That's the point," said Christina. "The last thing we want is for it to look special, because then it would stand out to the wrong people who might want to take it." Michael smiled. "The wrong people? Huh? Like me?" Christina smiled back, but it wasn't a very friendly smile. "Oh, don't worry yourself, Michael. You're not the wrong person, though you are going to have to give me the watch now. You remember our agreement?" Michael nodded slowly, though I noticed he didn't stop throwing the watch from hand to hand. "Of course, but suppose I want to keep it for a little while longer." "Then watch as I can stop funding the Injectors," said Christina. She leaned forward, her cat-like smile never leaving her lips. "And your entire drug operation completely falls apart. You know that the only reason your little gang has become as powerful as it has is because of the money you've received from us." I stifled a gasp. Icon was funding the Injectors. That made a lot of sense, actually, and explained a lot, but at the same time I couldn't help but feel surprised. Why would Icon fund a drug cartel as dangerous as these guys? What was their actual goal? What was even going on here? And Michael stopped throwing the watch from hand to hand. I remember quite well. I was just joking. As useful as the watch would be to my business, I know what happens to people who let their greed get the best of them. I've had to kill more than a few Injectors who tried to keep money they were supposed to give to me to themselves. I'm not going to let that happen to me, not even for a weapon as powerful as the watch. "Excellent," said Christina. She held out a hand. "Now, I'd like to take the watch off your hands. I need to get back to headquarters soon, because my boss is starting to get impatient and worried about the watch being out in the wider world for so long." Michael handed the watch to Christina without hesitation. Christina took it and held the watch in her hands, looking at it as if she had finally achieved her wildest dreams. Anger filled me when I saw Christina touch the watch, because I knew, deep in my heart, that the watch wasn't hers and that it rightfully belonged to me, but I still didn't move, because if I did now, then Michael and Christina would just kill me. With the successful acquisition of the watch, Will you please ask Chaser to increase our funding? We've conquered nearly all of Rumsfeld and much of High Hills County. In order to expand our operations to the rest of the state, we'll need more money than we currently have. At least a 10% increase in our budget, though 15 or 20 would be even better. Certainly, said Christina, flashing Michael a winning smile. Once Chaser is holding the watch in his hands, I'm sure he will be happy to give you as much money as you want. Your work here in Texas is crucial to the success of our own plans, after all. I tilted my head to the side. How did Icon benefit from the distribution of the power drug? I put that question out of my mind for now, because right now I needed to focus on getting the watch back. For that matter, who was Chaser? The leader of Icon? It sure sounded like it, though I'd never heard the guy's name before. If it was Christina's boss, then he was probably even worse than her. Good to hear, said Michael. Whatever you give me, I will make it back 10 times over in power revenue. There are still lots of people who are willing to pay a pretty penny to become super, especially rich people who are too lazy to complete the superhero exam themselves. Excellent, said Christina. Anyway, I think I should be. Christina was interrupted by Michael's cell phone ringing. Michael pulled his phone out of his pocket and, answering it, said, "What is it?" I couldn't hear what the voice on the other end of the line said, but I did see Michael's expression, which grew increasingly grimmer and grimmer the longer he listened to the voice. I see, said Michael. Have the others search the area around the building. Order all injectors to shoot to kill. We cannot afford to let that kid survive. That kid, Christina said as Michael hung up the call and put his phone back into his pocket. You aren't talking about Jack, are you? Who else? Said Michael. I thought this might happen. The men I sent up to the roof just called me to inform me that they cannot see the kid's body anywhere on the pavement below, and the guards I have stationed around the building have reported not finding his body either. Meaning he survived, said Christina in amazement. But how? He doesn't have his powers anymore. There's no way he should have been able to survive that fall. I don't know or care, said Michael. Whether the kid was saved by someone or somehow managed to survive the fall and drag himself to safety, it's clear that I can no longer rely on my men to do the job. I must take things into my own hands. Michael walked over to the bookshelves and pulled out a particularly old-looking red book from the top shelf. Immediately, the shelf to his right slid aside, revealing a short hallway that I could not see down. Wait, where are you going? Said Christina, rising from her chair. Michael looked over his shoulder at her. To prepare for war, of course. Michael turned and walked into the hallway. As soon as he did, the bookshelves slid closed behind him, leaving Christina standing by herself somewhat awkwardly by the main desk. I was a little annoyed that Michael had apparently disappeared, but hey, at least he didn't take the watch with him. I quietly moved over to the next desk, avoiding Christina, who was still looking at the bookshelves which Michael had disappeared behind a few seconds ago. This is not good, said Christina, apparently talking to herself. If that kid is still alive, then he might be able to tell the police where we are, and our entire plan will fall apart. Screw Michael. He can hunt the brat if he wants. I got the watch. I'm going to get out of here before everything goes to hell. Christina walked around the desk and toward the door as quickly as she could. When she passed my desk, I stuck out my leg and she tripped over it, sending the Trickshot Watch flying out of her hands as she fell to the floor with a shout. I didn't even waste a moment. I darted out from the desk and jumped, catching the Trickshot Watch before it hit the floor. I landed on the carpeted floor on my belly, but I didn't care, because I had the watch firmly in my grasp now. I couldn't help but smile, feeling the smooth surface of the watch's face with my thumbs. Sorry it took so long, TW, I muttered, but we're finally back together again. But then I felt something wrap around my legs and looked down to see an energy rope tied around my legs. Holding the other end of the rope was Christina. Her hair was messed up and her clothing was a bit wrinkled from the fall, but it was her eyes full of insanity and triumph which made me freeze where I lay. Dumb brat, said Christina. You had the perfect chance to go and tell the police about us, but you wasted it trying to steal the watch back. You really are just another dumb kid, aren't you? I didn't respond to that. I just slapped the watch on my wrist and, flipping the face, slammed the button down as hard as I could. In seconds, the Trickshot costume appeared over my body once again, and I felt strength flow through me. Ha, I cried out. Looks like I made the smart choice after all. Get ready to. Christina grunted and the energy rope began crawling upon my body. I raised my arms, but it was no good, because the rope went up to my chest and without warning suddenly started constricting like a snake. The air was forced out of my lungs and I couldn't breathe. All this effort to get back the watch, but you only accomplished dying like a clown, said Christina, shaking her head. Lucky for us that you're such an idiot. Otherwise, I would actually be worried that you might beat us. I would have told Christina to shut the hell up, but unfortunately that required air to breathe, which I didn't have at the moment. But I wasn't nearly as helpless as Christina thought. I reached down and pulled out one of the metal discs from the pouch attached to my belt. I aimed and threw the disc at her face, but Christina ducked, dodging it very easily. How pathetic, said Christina, standing up again. You threw a dumb disc at me, and you didn't even hit me. What's up with that? I thought that the legendary Trickshot never misses. I would have made some clever quip just then about how I never miss, but again, that required air. All I could do was smirk as I saw my disc bounce off the window behind her and then off the ceiling directly at the back of her head. She didn't even see it coming. The disc struck Christina directly in the back of her head. She immediately collapsed onto the floor, unconscious, while her energy rope dissipated around my body, allowing me to breathe once again. I scrambled to my feet and looked down at her, but it was pretty obvious that she was not going to be getting up again anytime soon. Still breathing hard, I walked over to Mom and Dad to make sure they were okay. Kneeling in front of them, I shook them both, saying, "Hey, can you two hear me? Wake up, please?" Thankfully, their eyes flickered open. At first they had dazed looks as if they didn't know where they were, but soon understanding dawned in their eyes and they looked around the office in confusion. "Ha!" said Dad. "Where are we? What happened?" He looked at me with a confused look. "And who are you?" "I'm Trickshot," I said. "As for where you were in danger, but now you're safe. I just need to untie both of you, and we can all get out of here safely." "I remember someone knocking at the door," said Mom in a slightly dazed voice. When I answered, something hard hit my head, and that is all I can remember. It was undoubtedly the Injectors, I said, but there's no time to explain. Come on, I'll undo your ropes and get you guys out of here. Just as I reached for the ropes holding Mom and Dad down, Dad's eyes widened and he said, "Watch out." Something sharp stabbed into my back. Crying out suddenly, I threw my arms behind me, but whoever had stabbed me jumped out of my reach. I turned around to see who had stabbed me and dread fell over me when I saw who now stood a few feet away from me. It was Lethal Injection, and he was holding up one of his stingers slightly stained with my blood. As soon as I looked at Lethal Injection, I suddenly gasped. My veins started to burn and my whole body felt like it was on fire. I staggered, almost falling to my hands and knees, but instead I leaned on one of the nearby desks for support, panting hard as the venom worked its way through my body. It would still be a while before it actually killed me, but I could tell it was a fast-acting poison, which meant I didn't have much longer if I wanted to live. Lethal Injection, as usual, said nothing. He just looked at me from behind his helmet, his expression hidden away by his helmet's visor. "Damn it," I said, my voice tinged with raggedness. I should have seen that coming. I expected Lethal Injection to be as silent as usual, but instead, he chuckled, a sound that seemed oddly familiar for some reason. "What's so funny?" I said. "I'm dying here and you think this is amusing." Lethal Injection shook his head. He tapped the side of his helmet, and the visor flipped up suddenly, revealing a familiar face I had not expected to see behind that helmet. I gaped. "Michael Jones, your Lethal Injection." "Lethal Injection, no," Michael Jones nodded, a smirk on his face. "Correct, kid. Since you're going to be dying anyway, I thought it wouldn't hurt to show you my real identity." But I coughed once or twice, not serious coughs, but enough to make me worried for my own health. I didn't know you and Lethal Injection were one and the same. "Very few do," said Michael. "It is beneficial for my purposes if most people believe that Lethal Injection and Michael Jones are two different individuals. That way, my enemies waste time trying to shoot two targets when they should really be aiming for one. Besides, assassination is how I got my start in organized crime, and the Lethal Injection identity lets me indulge in it every now and then, whenever I get bored running the day-to-day operations of the Injectors." You monster," I said. I let go of the desk and tried to take a step closer, but the world spun around me and I was forced to grab the desk again to avoid falling over. You don't just hire an assassin to kill people. You are the assassin. "Brilliant deduction," said Michael sarcastically. "Tell me, what other brilliant insights will you have? Perhaps next you will realize that I am the leader of the Injectors and that I'm very good at selling power to those who have the money to spend on it." Breathing was becoming harder for me now, but I said, "I don't have any more insights to share with you. I'm going to take you down once and for all, regardless of what getup you're wearing." I flew toward Michael, hoping to get in at least one good punch before the poison killed me. Just one punch was all it would take to take him down. But Michael spun around and slammed his suit's scorpion tail into my face. The surprisingly strong blow sent me flying into and through his desk. I slammed against the windows on the other side of the room, causing them to crack upon impact, but they didn't break. Still, the impact of slamming my skull against the solid glass windows made my head spin even more than it already did, which, in addition to the poison in my body, made it almost impossible for me to focus long enough to do anything other than lie helplessly on the floor like a baby. Michael appeared over me. He knelt beside me, resting his arms on his knees, looking at me with the most amused smirk I had ever seen on another human being's face. "I will admit, kid, that you did well," said Michael, "putting 20 of my men behind bars and sneaking directly into my office without me knowing. You even gave me a good fight back in the factory a few days ago, even though it was fairly inconclusive. But in the end, I can't let you live, and I think you know why." I spat in his face. "Monster." Michael wiped the spit off his face, but he didn't get angry. "Is that all you have to say? I thought you would pick your final words more carefully. It's a shame, because when I was growing up, I deeply admired the original Trickshot. I even dreamed of becoming a superhero myself someday, but alas, fate had a different plan for me, taking me down a road that has led me to clash rather than work with supers more often than not. Perhaps in another life, you and I would be superheroes working together to keep Rumsfeld safe, but in this life, we're mortal enemies, and only one of us can survive." I would have said something back to his face, but it was becoming harder and harder to breathe with each passing second. My eyes started to water and all of the strength had been sapped from my limbs, making me feel as weak as I did without the costume. Darkness was tugging at the edges of my vision, and soon the poison would reach my heart or my brain, or maybe both, and I would be dead. My costume, I knew, could remove the poison, if given enough time to do so, but I was afraid that I didn't have time for the costume to force the poison out of my body. Even if it did, there was nothing stopping Michael from shooting me in the face with the acid from his tail, acid that would kill me just as easily as, if not more painfully than, the poison currently coursing through my veins. Michael stood up and dusted himself off. "Look at this. I went to all of the trouble to put on my lethal injection costume, only to kill you in a matter of minutes. It's somewhat of a hassle to get into and out of, but I can't complain. If I hadn't put on the costume, I would likely be at your mercy, instead of you being at my mercy." I couldn't say anything. I could barely even move. I just glared at Michael with as much anger as I could muster, which was about the only way I could let him know that I wasn't afraid of him and that I was going to remain defiant to the end. To my frustration, Michael just chuckled. "Keep glaring, kid," said Michael. "It's an ugly expression to die with on your face, but I suppose we're all allowed to decide how we want to look when we die, even if it is ugly." Shaking his head, Michael turned and started walking away, but before he could get very far, Dad suddenly appeared out of nowhere and tackled him to the floor with a yell. "Gotcha, you bastard," Dad said, pinning Michael to the floor with his bulk. "You're the one who sold my son those drugs that killed him. No way am I ever going to forget that." Michael just grunted in annoyance underneath Dad. His tail whipped Dad across the face quickly, knocking Dad off of him. Michael rose to his feet and kicked Dad in the gut, knocking Dad flat off his feet and onto the floor, where he lay with a stunned look on his face. "Dad," I said in a low whisper that I doubted anyone other than myself heard. "No." Surprisingly, Dad got to his feet, but Michael punched him in the face, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and then slammed his face against the desk. Then Michael threw Dad onto the floor and kicked him again, this time far more viciously than before, enough to make Dad wheeze in pain. "Walter." Mom screamed from the other side of the office. "Walter? No." Of course, Michael paid no attention to Mom's screams. He just kept kicking Dad while he was down, each blow more vicious than the last. If I didn't intervene quickly, Dad would definitely die. "I need to get up," I muttered to TW. "I need to get up and save Dad. I need to get up and save Dad now." "Sorry, Jack, but I'm afraid there's nothing I can do to help you," said TW in my head. "The suit can get rid of the poison, but it will likely take hours before it does." "I don't have hours," I muttered angrily. "I barely have minutes." "I know, but there's still nothing I can do about it," said TW. "I'm sorry, I truly am. I wish I could save your father, but I am just as powerless to save him as you are. I'm sorry." "Please don't worry about it," I muttered. "I'll think of something." The darkness around the edges of my eyes was growing thicker. It was harder to think. I was barely even aware of Michael beating Dad to death. Bit by bit, my life was slipping through my fingers, and there was nothing I could do about it. Nothing, that is, except ask for help. "Costume," I said in my mind. "Costume, can you hear me? I know you're busy working on trying to get rid of the poison in my body, but I need your help. I can't move myself at the moment. I need your help to save Dad. Please help me." Of course, there was no response, as usual. I didn't talk to my costume much, so I suppose the lack of a response was to be expected, but I still needed to talk to it and convince it to help me. "Dad needs your help," I said. "And he's not just my dad. He's the son of your original owner, Gregory. If you don't help me get on my feet and take down Michael, then you'll be letting down Gregory. You'll be letting down me?" Nothing. No response. Nothing to indicate that my suit heard me, or that it was even paying attention to anything I said. Maybe it still didn't respect me enough to listen to anything I had to say, or maybe it was too focused on getting the poison out of my system to pay attention. Regardless, it was clear that this last-ditch effort of mine had failed, and that meant that my quest to avenge Thomas had failed as well. But then I felt strength flood my limbs. My vision cleared and my entire body felt as energetic as it always did. Deep down, I knew this came from the costume, which was granting me its strength in order for me to do what I needed to do. Rising to my feet, I ran toward Michael, who was still kicking Dad over and over again. But then Michael stopped kicking him and aimed his acid tail at him, clearly about to finish him off. I grabbed Michael's tail, causing Michael to look over his shoulder at me in surprise, but I didn't give him a chance to respond. With super strength flowing through my limbs, I whirled around and threw Michael at the cracked windows behind me. Michael didn't even scream. He just flew through the air, a stunned look on his face, as if he could not believe what was happening, and smashed straight through the solid glass window as though it wasn't even there. Then Michael vanished over the edge of the window, and seconds later, I heard a faint thunk below to indicate that Michael had hit the ground. The end of the Legacy Superhero Season 1, Episode 9, The Price of Heroism.